Hey folks, I'm Alex Dowd.
And I'm Katie Reif.
This holiday weekend, Paul Thomas Anderson returns to the San Fernando Valley of his youth with Licorice Pizza, a sprawling comedy of puppy love, waterbeds, pinball machines, oil shortages, and Hollywood celebrity. But how does it stack up to Anderson's other films? We'll discuss that and more today on a special bonus episode of the show.
Welcome to Film Club.
Okay, folks, thanks again for joining us for another episode of the show, for a bonus episode of the show, actually, this week. If you've been listening to Film Club over the month of November, you know that we have been talking all month long about the films of Paul Thomas Anderson.
Yep.
And if you have not been listening to that, you can find those on the site or anywhere you get your podcasts. The first episode, we talked about Boogie Nights and Hard Eight. And the second one, we talked about Magnolia and Punch Drunk Love. The third one, we talked about There Will Be Blood and Phantom Thread. And we have one more full episode this week that you can listen to. That is on The Master and Inherent Vice, his two films with Joaquin Phoenix. But we've now seen Licorice Pizza as well.
Yes.
By many cinephile accounts, the most anticipated movie of the year.
Twice
I would say.
A piece. We saw it twice.
That's true. You saw it twice in one day.
Yeah, I just made a day of it.
Yeah. I watched it. I watched it back-to-back days, so 2 times in 2 days. I think the last time I did that was with my favorite movie of last year, Charlie Kaufman's Thinking of Ending Things.
Oh, yeah, and that was on Netflix, so you could...
It was a little easier, because in this case, I obviously went to the theater to see this twice.
Yeah, it's... For Inside Baseball Corner, there's been a lot of screenings of Licorice Pizza around, in all your major markets. And a lot of them, if you're wondering how, if you follow people on Film Twitter, you're wondering how everybody is seeing Licorice Pizza, it's because the guilds, like the Directors Guild of America or Writers Guild of America, SAG, so on and so forth, they got a lot of confidence in the film. They're showing it to all the guilds.
They want people to see it. Obviously, I mean, this time of year for us is always jam-packed with screenings, and they're trying to get everything in before we vote for things. So we have seen a number of the movies that are coming out over the coming weeks. There's still a few we're waiting on, but we'll see them within the next couple of weeks. The response to Licorice Pizza has been, I would say, on a whole, overwhelmingly positive.
Yeah, that's almost an understatement. Like, rapturous is a better word.
I think it's rocking a 95 or something on Metacritic right now.
Yeah, which is pretty good. And Metacritic is usually lower than Rotten Tomatoes.
Yeah, well, because Rotten Tomatoes merely measures whether or not someone was positive or negative on the film. So a Rotten Tomatoes score, when people say, "Well, it got an 80 on Rotten Tomatoes," that does not mean that it does not mean that they took all the reviews out there and decided that everybody felt that it was an 80.
Right. It's not a B average. It just means that 80% of critics said, yeah, it was fine.
Exactly. Yeah. At least kind of liked it. Yeah. Whereas on Metacritic, the score that they come up with is always based on more essentially aggregating the various scores, whatever system you have, the various publications have. We use letter grades, obviously, but some of them use stars and numbers and et cetera. Licorice Pizza, very well received at this point. If I'm honest with you, I think one of the reasons that I went and watched it a second time was that I did not love it. And I wanted to kind of see if I missed something, because for me, this movie is. I think there's a lot to love about this film, but it ultimately I think leaves me a little.
It's a super lovable movie.
Oh yeah, there's tons of wonderful stuff in it. I've written at this point 1,100 words on it for the site. You can find the full review on the site. A part of me wonders if I've quite figured out exactly why I don't love it the way that other people do. Sometimes that's what you find yourself just kind of trying to. I mean, I really do genuinely believe that writing film reviews is often just about wrestling with yourself.
Interesting. Okay.
That's really just about trying to reconcile the different ways that you might feel about something, For sure. I mean, I see a lot of film criticism, and something that you learn from doing it on regularly is to parse the difference between like your personal taste and like the question of taste and quality is like this constant push-pull, and it's something that I think you kind of, if you're doing your job in a thoughtful way, you need to think about that a lot. I think so, yeah. Well, because, and I often find myself in a position where I have an emotional response to something, one might just call it the peer response of taste or something.
Yeah.
This thing worked for me.
I liked it.
Or I liked it or I didn't like it.
Yeah.
And then what the review ends up being a lot of the time is trying to intellectualize something that maybe is not even purely intellectual.
Right.
It's like trying to sort of justify why you like something or didn't like something. Sometimes you succeed, sometimes you don't. I don't know. If I had to, let's talk a little bit about what this film is, for starters, and then we'll get into how we feel about it, I guess. The film is set as I said in the intro, the film is set in the San Fernando Valley. The year is 1973. Because there's a whole oil embargo that happens.
Yep.
And
Nixon shows up.
It very much places it in a specific year. I think over a single summer, it's tough to tell exactly, but to me, this feels like this takes place over a pretty condensed period of time.
We talked about this shortly after seeing the movie because I wasn't sure if maybe it took place over a couple of years or if it was a short period of time. You know, a lot happens to these characters over the course of the film, and you do wonder, is it just a really whirlwind summer, or is it a condensed version of several years of their lives?
I don't think he gets older. I mean, the movie at its core, there's a lot of stuff happens in this movie. You could say it's about a lot of things. At its core, it is about a 15-year-old child actor who's kind of fading out of celebrity. Basically, he's not going to be a star.
Yeah, he's not going to make the transition to successful adult actor.
Exactly. There's I really appreciate the efficiency in which Anderson tells us that, because there's just one scene where he goes in to do a cold read basically for a commercial and totally botches it. You know? And that's more or less in the film. That's pretty much all we really see of him acting or going or going to auditions or anything, and it just functions as a perfect way to be like, this kid is not going to be he's not going to be a star.
This is the end of the road for this kid.
Totally.
And it's really one line. There's really one line that tells you everything you need to know.
Yep.
Like, he walks into the audition, and Maya Rudolph has a small part in the movie, and she goes, "Oh my God, you're huge."
Yeah, I know. Not a cute kid anymore. This character, Gary Valentine's his name, and in the opening scene of the film, he spots this woman outside of a photo studio. This character we come to know, Alana Kane is her name. She works at this photo studio. She's 25 years old, though, and he's 15. So you could say that's the major obstacle in their romance, is that she can't date a 15-year-old. He's a child.
That's just not going to happen.
It's not going to happen. The movie, I would say the movie is fairly... I don't think the movie is interested in coming down on the morality of
No, it's
people.
not. It's not interested in that. It's not interested in parsing it. If anything, it adds some conflict to the relationship by throwing up an obstacle. But overall, it's not the most important. The whole movie doesn't hinge on it, I don't think.
If you are looking for a film that is going to empirically tell you that it is wrong for a 25-year-old to potentially become involved with a 15-year-old, you're not going to find that here.
Yeah.
Good luck with that.
I mean, I don't know. I mean, it's a little didactic for a movie like this.
I mean, we're not here to weigh in on that either, ultimately, I guess I would say.
And it was the 70s, man. Like, people had different attitudes in the 70s about stuff like that.
So Anderson was born in 1970, so I don't think you could quite call this movie autobiographical.
No, not quite. He would have been like a little toddler child.
3 years old or something, you know. And he's supposedly he has spoken about the inspiration. There's a guy named Gary Goetzman from the early 70s. He eventually became a Hollywood producer, and he is kind of the very loose inspiration for Gary in this film.
Yeah.
But nonetheless, the movie certainly feels like something that's been plucked from his memories.
Yeah, it does. I would call it a memory piece. It really it feels, I mean, even if he's not remembering specific characters and incidences from his own life, you could see that the way that it shows the valley at that time, that could very well be coming from his own memory.
Very much so. I think he's kind of vibing on a time and place that is probably pretty instrumental to who he is as a person. You know,
yeah,
he grew up in that whole period, and
much like Once Upon a Time in Hollywood.
I mean, there's a lot of similarities I think between those two films.
Yeah, it'd be really interesting to talk to Anderson about, because I mean, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, he probably saw it almost 3 years ago now. And like, I'd be curious if there's any dialogue going on there.
Yeah, me too, actually. Me too, because there's so many similarities. And one of the most one of the most enjoyable qualities of this new film, I think, is how it brings that time period to life in terms of dress, in terms of sort of cosmetic details about the world.
Yeah, yeah.
There's this wonderful early scene where they go to this. It's like a teen business expo.
Yeah, it struck me as an early iteration of a Comic-Con, kind of, because you had, it's called like the Teenage Fair, and at the beginning you see a Batmobile pull up, somebody has a Herbie the Love Bug, and he's credited as Herman Munster as himself in the credits, but John C. Reilly shows up for a split second as Herman Munster.
Which you can tell the minute you hear his voice, it's John C. Reilly.
Oh, yeah. They put his voice in there on purpose because he's got a very recognizable voice.
Yeah, which speaking of, it's nice to see Reilly show up in an Anderson movie again. You know, I mean, he's one of Anderson's original players. Obviously, he's the star of Hard Eight, his first movie, and for a while he was reliably in his films.
Yep.
And then that just stopped.
In the first half of his career, like we talked about in our first 2 episodes.
Yep, that's right. I actually heard a very funny, just a side note, I heard a very funny, kind of slightly sad story, and I don't remember the source on this, so, I don't know exactly how accurate it is, but I'm just going to barrel forward and keep talking about this, I guess. But I had heard that, we talked last week about There Will Be Blood. There's a character in There Will Be Blood who shows up and claiming to be the main character, Daniel Plainview's brother.
Right.
His brother from another mother, he says. I read somewhere that Paul Thomas Anderson wrote that part for John C. Reilly because he wanted to give, their friends at this point.
To have his guy in his movie again.
Want to get him in there again. And John C. Reilly read it and said, Paul, if you want to cast somebody else in this role, you can. I feel like maybe I might not actually totally work in this role.
Oh, wow.
And then Paul Thomas Anderson did, in fact,
He said
do
okay.
That, yeah.
He said okay.
It feels like it might have been funnier than intended if John C. Reilly was in that
Yeah, that's
role.
the thing is that John C. Reilly has, like, he can play melancholy and all this other stuff, but he has a comedian's essence.
He does. Actually, I think that another wild side note here, if you're like one of Reilly's one of his best performances, I think, and one of his least, it has a comic quality, but it's also a deeply melancholy performance, is his turn in The Sisters Brothers.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. Anyway, that's total side note.
But yeah, there's a lot of little details in this. There is a restaurant that Gary likes to go to. Gary's character, like we said, he's 15, but he's a child actor, and he kind of runs the family. He says his mom works for him. They have a little PR firm where they do PR for different local restaurants and stuff. And he likes to, he fancies himself, a hotshot regular at this restaurant in the valley. I think it's called like Tail of the Cock. I don't know if it's a real place, but it certainly has that quality. It has that Musso and Franks in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood quality of like, here's this institution of this neighborhood that everybody knows and everybody loves. And yeah, but I thought that was so endearing, the way he walks in and he says the maitre d', and they're all like, hello, Mr. Valentine. And he's this little kid with like acne on his face. And he's like, 2 Cokes, please, barkeep. It's so cute.
He's this little teenage hustler, cute. And he's like playing at adulthood in a lot of ways.
He really is.
I mean, I think part of his whole thing with Alana, part of this woman he's met, is that he is attracted to the idea of being older than he really is, And, she's beautiful, but I think it also part of it is just him grasping for an adult life that he's not a part of yet.
Right. Yeah. Like he says to his brother after he meets her, I met the woman I'm going to marry. And it's like, you're 15.
I know. Yeah, there's a little bit of a Max Fisher quality to him.
Oh, interesting.
Max Fisher, of course, the lead character of Rushmore, the film by the other Anderson, the other famous Anderson with a movie this year.
There's 3 of them. There's Paul W.S. also.
There's Paul W.S. There's also Roy Anderson.
Oh, yeah. Well, that's
True.
2 S's, though. That's the Nordic way of spelling Anderson.
And there's Tom Anderson.
Oh, my God, there's so many.
The Los Angeles plays itself guy.
That's right.
Yeah, a lot of Andersons out there. Yeah, I mean, just as an aesthetic object, this movie is lovely a lot of the time.
Lovely, lovely, affectionate, warm. And it does have kind of a teenage quality to it. It has that sort of like glow to it of like remembering your teenage years and looking back on it. But it's not a sentimental film. I think that it does have that warm glow that I was just mentioning, but it's not maudlin. It's not, things used to be so much better than they are now. Right. It's not sentimental in that way, I don't think.
I think part of that is sort of the impossibility of its relationship too, in a way. I think that because, I mean, as the movie progresses, the two characters get closer in some ways, but there is always this. There's always something stopping them, in some respects, from going further than they might go. And I think that a lot of that is the age gap between them. I think Alana knows, in some respects, that she cannot have a relationship with him. You know?
Yeah. This is not a good idea. It's not going to work out. Like, no matter what. Like, But what's interesting about the age gap too is that they are, in some ways, he is farther along in his like journey towards becoming himself than she is. Like, he's trying on all these different identities. You know, he starts off as an actor, and then he becomes a waterbed salesman, and then he becomes a pinball machine arcade owner. You know, he tries on all these different identities throughout the film, but she just kind of tags along. Yeah. You know, she doesn't really have any ideas about what she wants to do with herself.
No, I mean, if you talk about power balance in a relationship, which is something that is often in many relationships, there is an unequal power dynamic, and I think one of the reasons that these two can kind of seem like they're on equal footing in some respects is that though she is older than him, she has not figured it out either. Yeah. And one of the smartest things about the movie, honestly, and one of the things that I like the most about it, is that I think it sort of upends our expectations about whose story this really is.
Yes.
You know?
It starts off with you thinking in one person's the main character, but it shifts.
Well, right, because the first shot of the movie, the first shot of the film is Gary, played by Cooper Hoffman, son of Philip Seymour Hoffman, the late frequent collaborator of Paul Thomas Anderson.
This is another sweet thing about this movie.
Yeah, for sure. But the first shot of the movie is him sort of fixing his hair in the mirror. And then he spots her in line. He's in line for this photo studio, and he spots her. So the movie has sort of set up that this is going to be the thrust of the movie is his infatuation with her. How am I going to get this girl? He says the second scene of the movie or something, he says, I met the girl I'm going to marry. Right. One day. So I think having seen enough movies like this over the years, you're kind of primed to think this movie is going to be about him pursuing her in this impossible dream he has of being with this girl.
And the thing with that is that a lot of times when movies are about that, the girl isn't really a person. She's a symbol.
Yes.
And this all kind of ties into what we were talking about with Phantom Thread with the power dynamics and the whole muse idea and a woman is this object to be conquered and all this stuff. But this movie really subverts that by really, in the end, turning it around, and she is very much a person, and it turns into the sense that it's more about her and where she's going with her life in the end.
I think it's very much her movie. I think that's not clear immediately, but it becomes clear as we go along. And I think a lot of that too is the casting. I mean, Alana is played by Alana Hayam, who is in the California rock band Hayam. Her sisters are in it too, playing her
and
sisters.
Their parents.
And her parents.
Their parents are in it as their parents. Oh, it's so cute.
It's a total star-making performance. She is incredible. I
think Cooper Hoffman, that kid's going places too. Yes, especially for someone who she doesn't really act. She's just a musician. No. But yeah, I guess the subtlety of the way she expresses her emotions in this movie is very natural, and she is kind of a natural, I think, as an actor.
Yeah, for sure. There is that kind of naturalism that you're talking about, but at the same time, I also think there's this kind of movie star radiance to her.
Oh,
as well,
okay, yeah.
So, I hope she keeps acting in things because I think she's terrific in this, Anderson obviously has directed a number of
J-Lo move over. Sorry, go ahead.
Anderson has directed a number of the music videos by Hayam, and I have to imagine he saw something in her in those music videos and said, I think that you can anchor a movie.
That's something that we've talked about plenty of times on this series too, how Anderson does seem to have a talent for looking at people and seeing their potential.
Yes, seeing their utility in some ways. That kind of makes it sound a little bit more mercenary than it is.
No, it's much warmer than that, I think.
I think he's brilliant with actors, and I think a lot of that is him sort of looking at these actors and seeing what they can do. And I think you're right that Hoffman's good too. He's he kind of has this perfect balance of sort of cocky teenage confidence, but also he's very awkward.
Yeah. He does well as a boy playing at being a man.
Totally. I kept catching these glimpses of his father, honestly.
There was a picture I saw where someone put a picture of Cooper Hoffman on the phone in Licorice Pizza with Philip Seymour Hoffman on the phone in Punch Drunk Love next to each other, and it's you look at it and you're like, yeah. That's totally. Father and son right there.
Yep. He's not. I don't think he's not like a dead ringer. It's not like you're the entire movie
it's
thinking
not eerie
that's
or
Philip Seymour Hoffman. Yeah. Right. But every once in a while, his mannerisms will creep in there, and it's like always affecting. It's
like this little sad sack quality.
Totally. Yes, you're right. It's
the
at
sad
his core,
sack
Philip Seymour Hoffman has a sadness about him as an actor, and that comes through, I think, in his son. So we've been talking about this film, which obviously we both liked quite a bit, and I guess, and part of me is still sorting out exactly why I didn't love it the way that so many others have loved it. Because I had this thought the other day, just after I had written the review and talking about it, that I've been here at the AV Club for almost 9 years, and most years when we do our best of the year, I write the number one, the capsule for the number one.
It's
film
usually
of the year.
A pretty consensus pick on the number one.
It often is.
Or there will be like 3 that are really battling it out for the top spot.
Yep, totally. Sometimes it's within little inside tidbit here. The Irishman in 2019 won our best of the year poll by 1 point.
To what was the second?
Once Upon a Time in Hollywood.
There you go.
Yep, they were that close. We made the right call, in my opinion. But I think this might actually be the first year where if Licorice Pizza is our number one of the year, and just based on the reactions I've seen from a lot of our contributors, that might be the case. I don't know if I'll be the one writing it.
May I offer up a theory?
Okay.
So something that I was thinking about, because we're doing this series and watching all of Anderson's other movies, and particularly the 2 we talked about last week, and one of the ones we'll be talking about Joaquin Phoenix. These are like big, weighty masterworks.
Yeah.
And compared to that, Licorice Pizza is a pretty slight movie.
Yeah.
It's a hangout movie. It doesn't have that much of a plot. It's more of just kind of like hanging out with these characters for a couple hours, and like funny little things happen along the way. And things do happen in their lives, but it's subtly. There really aren't any like big dramatic confrontations or anything like that. And so do you think that maybe like the juxtaposition of the 2 modes of Anderson might be influencing that?
Very much could be. I mean, we don't watch movies in a vacuum.
Right.
Lots of different factors influence how we end up feeling about something. And going over his filmography and seeing these films that I think are a lot more controlled than this one, I mean, his last film, Phantom Thread, I think is one of his most masterfully controlled films.
Yeah, absolutely.
You watch that movie and think there is not a piece that's out of place in this movie. Every single scene, maybe every shot feels purposeful. It feels like there's no way this thing needed to be different in any way. And I watch Licorice Pizza, and I think there are whole sections of this movie that feel expendable to me a little bit.
I wouldn't say expendable. I think that he's just making choices that suit the subject matter and the tone in terms of the filmmaking. And in Licorice Pizza, like, it is kind of like loose-limbed and kind of like relaxed and chill and stuff like that, but it suits the feeling of being a teenager and just doing nothing all day.
Yeah, I mean, that's true. As a depiction of growing up, you could say that it's maybe sort of appropriately lumpy.
Yeah, exactly.
Way,
Exactly.
So I get that. I still think that the movie kind of loses some momentum, I think, in its second half. And I think one of the issues is that Anderson is just pulling in so many different things that some of them feel to me like a distraction from what the movie is really about. There's this whole bit with Benny Safdie as he's playing a real-life LA politician. I won't say much more about that, I guess. But there's this whole subplot about a political race that's happening on the margins of the movie. And I found myself thinking this either needed to be less of a part of the movie or more of it.
Or more of a part of the movie?
Yeah.
I can see that.
Because I almost think it sort of hijacks the movie in its climax, really.
What I thought kind of hijacked the movie is partially maybe, not seeing it in a vacuum, that it was like such a big hyped part of it was Bradley Cooper coming in as another real life character, I believe.
Yes, yeah. He's playing John Peters, I believe is his name. He's a real Hollywood producer who did, in fact, in real life date Barbra Streisand.
Right. And things are kind of going along at this like kind of like low key, relaxed 70s teenage clip. And then he comes in and he's like, cocaine.
He's so funny though in the part.
He is really funny, but like it almost derails the movie. It's like the movie stops for a minute and it's like, hold up, Bradley Cooper's here, which is not necessarily a bad thing.
I just think it keeps doing that, though, honestly. I think that happens a few times throughout. I'm not necessarily crazy about the whole section with Sean Penn either.
Yeah.
There's a certain lack of discipline in some of the writing in this film, too, that's uncommon of Anderson, where he really is just kind of chasing threads. And some people find that delightful. I found it maddening in certain spots in this film.
I'm going to disagree in the sense that like I just said, it makes sense in terms of the subject matter and the characters. For it to kind of just be like trying different things, and maybe it doesn't always work out.
Because that's adolescence, right?
Exactly. And that's what's happening in a larger sense in the movie with these two main characters.
Sure. I do think as a comedy, too, it's a little hit or miss for me anyway. I mean, more hits than misses for sure. But can we talk about the one, what I would say is maybe the worst pair of scenes in his entire filmography?
I know which one you mean.
There is this there's this very brief, and it's a small thing in the film, but there is this restaurateur played by John Michael Higgins, the Christopher Guest regular. And his whole thing is that he owns a Japanese restaurant. He lived in Japan for a while, and he has a Japanese wife. And he does this kind of outrageous, ridiculous Japanese accent when he talks to her. He talks in English to her, but in this really, obviously
kind of racist voice.
Racist and offensive Japanese voice. Yeah. And you could make the case that that he is the butt of the joke.
Sure.
But
why though?
Is that? But why? But why? What's the point of it? And how is it going to play to audiences? Are there going to be audiences out there who are watching this and just find that hilarious in a really archaic way? I mean, you can't necessarily police how an audience is going to react to what a filmmaker is doing. You can say that there's tons of misunderstandings all the time and what a filmmaker's intentions are. But I can't necessarily see how his intentions are worth how this is going to appeal to people who just find a racist accent funny.
Right, exactly. Yeah, I don't know. I'm not going to try to justify that choice. The only thing that I don't think that it was necessary. I don't get why he torpedoed the movie by just like everything's going along great, and then it's like it's this big bump in the movie. We're just like, what the fuck,
It's just really unfunny too.
It's weird, it's weird.
Like the broadest thing I think I've ever seen in one of his movies.
Yeah, the only thing I'll say about it is it's yet another parallel to Once Upon a Time in Hollywood.
Yeah.
Well, something we talked about with Phantom Thread, his last film, is that he shot it himself. This continues that path for Anderson. He's credited as one of the cinematographers on this film.
And the other one worked with him on Phantom Thread as well in the camera department. Michael Bowman, I think is his name.
Yeah. So, it's interesting to me because, to me, I mean, maybe I'm reading into it, but I see that as kind of a turn towards the personal in his past couple of movies, really having all this ownership over all the different parts of the film and everything. And like we were saying, he would have been a very small child at the time where this movie takes place. But, you wonder if it is a little personal, like we said, at least in the sense of warm memories of a place and a time.
Totally. And the movie, I think, ultimately ends up feeling like something that is sort of edited and written even through a kind of emotional logic. He's like, whether or not all these experiences are things that happen to me, they all reflect my understanding of that time and place.
Yes.
And maybe my feelings about growing up.
And that's where I think that the Sean Penn scene and these kind of things that kind of are, maybe a little bit of a bumpy ride in terms of the overall easygoing narrative, the bumps in the road, so to speak. I think that probably on an emotional level, it expresses something about like the atmosphere at the time. Like maybe even that racist joke was like typical of the kind of stuff that people would say.
Right.
Like what people thought was funny at that time.
Yeah.
I mean, I think if you're looking for explanations of that kind of stuff and like why it's in there, I wouldn't be surprised to hear that it does have more of an emotional logic.
Mm-hmm. So I think ultimately this is a movie I liked, and my sort of reservations with it should not be read as me thinking this is a bad film. I think we just talked a couple minutes ago about these movies not existing outside of a vacuum.
Mm-hmm.
I think it can be kind of lonely to be in a position where you're like, yeah, I liked that movie, while everyone else is like fainting on the couch over what a rapturous masterpiece
Well,
it
you're
is.
also not prone to hyperbole on social media like some people are.
Well, this is true. I think ultimately, if someone asked me, should I see this, I would recommend it immediately.
I would. I liked it a little better than you did. Yeah. I really enjoyed hanging out with the characters, and I thought that, the shagginess was appropriate for the film. He was just doing what he does, which is make choices about the filmmaking that fit the material. I liked it a little better than you did, but I still wasn't like, like my mind wasn't...
coming after Phantom Thread, right? Which
maybe.
I think... But honestly...
Which I love.
Yeah. I mean, but his movies do, I think, tend to improve with repeat viewing, so who knows, maybe...
The second time I saw it was funnier, and it went by faster the second time I watched it.
Well, maybe by at some point in the future, I'll look back and say, what the fuck was I thinking? This is a masterpiece.
Well, you did give it a B+, and in the AV Club, as the sands of time wash over the AV Club, B+s often end up being the films with the best staying power. All right, everybody, that's all we've got for you today. Licorice Pizza opens in select theaters this Thanksgiving weekend and will open wide on Christmas Day. Please be sure to rate, review, and subscribe to Film Club wherever you get your podcasts.
This week's episode of Film Club was hosted by me, Alex Dowd, and by Katie Wright. It was produced, edited, and mixed by Carl Blomberg, and our motion graphics designer is Julie Mullins. If you're interested in hearing our thoughts on the other films from Paul Thomas Anderson, check out our 4-part Film Club series. We're off next week, but we'll be back in December with episodes on the movies of 2001 and the best movies of 2021. Thanks all.
Bye.